The alien princess whispered his name, and the stars trembled. Every morning, he walked the same streets of his small city, greeted the same familiar faces at the market, and worked the same job translating technical manuals for machines he barely understood. He had never imagined that anything about him could matter to the stars, let alone an alien princess from a civilization older than time itself. But the galaxy had its own ideas, and the first sign came not with a grand explosion or a sudden invasion, but with a voice that carried across the void in a way that felt impossible. Elias was at work when the message arrived. A shimmering blue light appeared on the wall of his office, and he froze, unsure if it was a hallucination. The light shaped itself into a holographic image of a starship, enormous, impossible, and moving silently through the sky above Earth's orbit. A voice followed, soft but commanding, speaking a language he did not recognize. Yet, for reasons he could not explain, the meaning of the words seeped into his mind. "You will come," the voice said. Elias blinked. I think there's been a mistake." "I'm just a translator," he whispered. The voice did not reply. Instead, the stars outside the window seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement, though the light was too faint to be seen from the ground. It was a quiet, almost tender acknowledgement, like the universe itself had noticed him for the first time. Within hours, a ship descended from orbit. It did not roar like human machines, nor did it create wind or noise. It simply appeared above the city, suspended in the sky as if held by invisible threads. The hull was polished like liquid silver, reflecting the clouds and buildings below. Elias could hear the faint hum of energy through the floor, and it was then he realized he was trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. Something in him knew he was meant to be here. Two figures appeared at the airlock. One was tall, her form elegant and commanding, with a presence that seemed to stretch beyond the physical. Her skin shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water, and her eyes held a depth that made Elias feel both small and infinite at the same time. She was the princess, though Elias did not know that yet. The other figure was a humanoid assistant, more practical, with instruments strapped to their body and a calm, calculating gaze. "You are Elias," the princess said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it filled the room entirely. "We have waited for you." I don't understand," Elias stammered. "Waited for me? Why, I'm just—" "You are human," she interrupted gently, "and that is why you matter." Elias laughed nervously, thinking it a joke. "Human? I mean, yes, but so is everyone else. That can't be important to—" She lifted a hand, and the air around them seemed to respond. A single star flickered faintly in the sky above, and Elias felt a shiver run through him. "Do not underestimate the power of being human," she said. Even as he tried to protest, Elias felt the truth of her words. Humans were fragile, yes. Short-lived, yes. Limited in ways alien species would never understand. But there was something in humans that defied measure, something the aliens had forgotten. The ability to choose, to hope, to feel deeply, and to act not for power but for meaning. Elias was led aboard the ship. Unlike human vessels, it was alive in subtle ways. Corridors seemed to shift slightly, guiding him without conscious design. Surfaces reflected not only light but thought, sensing emotions and responding gently. The princess walked beside him, her presence a quiet gravity. "You will stay in the observation chamber for now," she said. "There is much you will need to see." The observation chamber was a dome of transparent crystal, stretching infinitely above and below. Through it, Elias could see the black of space, dotted with stars, planets, and ships of alien design. One galaxy spun slowly, almost lazily, as if it were breathing. He felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the beauty and immensity. "Do you see it?" the princess asked. "The stars, they are listening. They always have, but most beings are too blind to notice." Elias shook his head, unsure if he understood. "Listening. They respond to choices," she said. "Not the choices of power, but the choices of the heart." You will find that humans have a rare gift. It is small, invisible, and yet it can ripple across entire systems. He wanted to laugh. It sounded like a fairy tale. Yet as he spoke, he realized the stars above were pulsing ever so faintly, like tiny hearts beating in rhythm with something he could not name. Days passed, though time aboard the ship felt different, elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made human clocks meaningless. Elias learned to speak the princess's language, not with words but with understanding. She did not teach him strategy or technology. She asked about life, about laughter, about the quiet courage of everyday acts. And each time he answered, the stars responded. Not loudly, not violently, but subtly, as if acknowledging the truth he spoke. It was not just observation. He began to notice small anomalies, a hallway shifting slightly to guide him, lights dimming when he felt fear, soft hums that seemed to echo the rhythm of his heartbeat. Even the assistant, who had been calculating and stoic at first, began to regard him with curiosity. One evening, Elias found himself alone with the princess in the observation chamber. The galaxy stretched endlessly around them, silent and still. He could feel the pulse of it, faint and distant like a whisper against his mind. "You are different from others," she said quietly, stepping closer. "You are human, yet you carry something immense." "I don't understand," he said. "I'm just me. I don't have powers." "I'm not important." "Importance is not measured by power," she said. "It is measured by influence, by the subtle ways one can touch the universe. You touch it without even trying." For the first time, Elias felt seen. Not as a worker, not as a translator, not as a small, fragile human, but as someone capable of changing the cosmos simply by existing. He wanted to deny it, to cling to the simplicity of his old life, but he knew the truth of her words. That night, as he slept in a cabin that seemed to breathe around him, Elias dreamed. In his dream, the stars whispered his name. Not loudly, not threateningly, but like a song, soft and reverent. And in that dream he felt something ancient stir, something older than empires, older than the oldest stars. When he awoke, he remembered the feeling. It stayed with him, quiet but insistent, as if a part of the universe itself recognized him. He did not know why or what it meant, but he could not shake the certainty that he was meant for something far beyond Earth. The princess appeared again without knocking. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice lighter than usual. I think so," he said. "I dreamed the stars whispered my name." She smiled faintly. "Good, remember it. The stars will listen more closely as time passes and you will need them." Elias tried to imagine how a human could affect the stars. It seemed impossible. Yet when he looked out through the observation dome, he could see faint ripples in the light, tiny changes in distant constellations, almost imperceptible. And in his chest, he felt a warmth, a sense of wonder and a quiet responsibility. Days became weeks. Elias observed the ship's journeys, learning to move among the crew, learning subtle things about alien technology and navigation. Yet he was never treated like a soldier or a scholar. He was treated like a witness, a human being whose presence alone mattered. And always the princess was nearby, her attention gentle but intense. She never forced him, never demanded explanations. Instead, she simply observed, waiting for him to discover the truth on his own. The first time she whispered his name in private, the stars responded. Not violently, not dramatically, but with a faint flicker of light that danced across distant systems. Elias could not explain it. He tried to tell her, but the words failed him. All he could do was stare, awed, and feel the universe around him shift in subtle ways. He realized then that he was no longer living on Earth. He had left behind familiar streets, familiar sounds, familiar routines. And yet, he felt more alive than he ever had. For the first time, he understood that life was not about safety or predictability. Life was about connection, about noticing the small, invisible threads that tied all things together, and acting with care and intention. And somehow, somewhere, far beyond the reach of humans or aliens, the stars were noticing him. The first part of his journey was only beginning. The stars continued to whisper, though no one aboard the ship would have admitted it. Elias could feel it, small tremors in the silence of the observation chamber, the faint warmth of recognition spreading across the galaxy. It was subtle at first, like a pulse, almost imperceptible, but every time he acted with care or spoke with honesty, the pulse grew stronger. He had been aboard the alien flagship for several weeks now, yet it did not feel like weeks. Time flowed differently here. Corridors shifted slightly as if anticipating his steps, and the ship's light would dim or brighten depending on his mood. The princess was always near, though she maintained the delicate balance between presence and absence. She asked questions that were never simple. "Tell me about hope," she asked one day, her eyes reflecting the distant nebulae. "How does it feel to hold hope when there is nothing certain?" Elias hesitated. He had never considered hope so deliberately before. "Hope feels like a small flame in the dark," he said finally. "Even if everything seems hopeless, it keeps you moving, keeps you trying. Sometimes it's tiny, almost invisible, but it is enough." The princess nodded, almost imperceptibly, and the stars above seemed to flicker in response. Elias did not notice it at first, but the assistant, ever silent and calculating, began to glance at him more often. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that this human, this ordinary man, carried something extraordinary. As days passed, strange anomalies became more frequent. Navigation systems would drift without explanation. Stars would pulse in patterns that matched Elias' heartbeat, and ancient alien relics aboard the ship activated when he approached. The crew murmured in quiet concern, unsure how a human could affect technology built over millennia. The princess, however, was not concerned. She watched Elias with an intensity that sometimes made him uncomfortable, and yet strangely safe. One afternoon, Elias found himself alone with the assistant in the ship's lower observation decks. The assistant studied him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Your presence, it disrupts systems," they said quietly. "Not intentionally, but inherently." "How do you explain that?" Elias shook his head. "I don't know, I don't even understand what's happening half the time. I just try to do what feels right." The assistant looked at him, expression unreadable. "Most beings do not notice such things. They act for power, for gain, for fear. You do not." Elias blinked. "So that's why the stars react, because I choose differently." "Yes," the assistant said simply. "It is rare. You are rare." The words made Elias uneasy. Rare was not something he had ever thought of himself as. Rare meant attention, responsibility, change. And in a galaxy ruled by empires and order, that could be dangerous. Yet he could not deny the quiet thrill that coursed through him at the thought that he mattered, even if he did not fully understand why. The princess returned just as the ship passed through a particularly dense nebula. The light from the nebula illuminated the observation deck in colors Elias had never seen: deep violet, shimmering gold, and faint pulses of silver. The stars seemed alive here, as though aware of the human observing them. "You feel it, do you not?" the princess asked, her voice soft, almost blending with the hum of the ship. I think so," Elias admitted. "It feels like the universe is listening." She smiled, a faint, quiet smile that made the space around her warmer. "It is. It always has been, but few understand how to be heard. You are learning that." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alert from the ship. The systems detected a small fleet approaching, aliens from a distant sector, known for their strict control over star routes and trade. The fleet did not attack, yet their presence alone caused tension aboard the ship. Elias felt the anxiety ripple through the corridors, through the crew, and even through the ship itself. The princess remained calm. "They will not harm us," she said. "They are curious, that is all." Elias studied the approaching fleet. Even from a distance, he could see their ships were massive, intricate, and formidable. Most humans would have felt fear, but Elias did not. Instead, he felt aware, as if the galaxy itself had handed him a choice. Over the next days, the fleet followed the flagship through multiple systems. At first, the crew was tense, expecting confrontation, but Elias suggested something unexpected. "Maybe they are not here to fight," he said one evening, gazing at the stars. "Maybe they are here to see. We can show them who we are without using weapons or force." The assistant frowned. "That is not strategic. That is illogical." "Maybe that is why it will work," Elias said quietly, "because it is human." The princess looked at him, eyes reflecting distant galaxies. "You are beginning to understand," she said. "Humans act not for conquest but for connection, and that is dangerous to those who depend only on control." Elias did not fully understand the implications. Yet as he spoke, he noticed the stars above flickering in patterns he had not seen before. They were responding to him again, subtly, like a gentle applause from the universe itself. Curiosity grew aboard the ship. Crew members began to watch him, some with suspicion, others with wonder. The aliens who had dismissed humans as insignificant now began to realize that Elias' choices, his small acts of empathy, were influencing not only the ship, but the flow of events around them. One evening, Elias found himself on the observation deck alone with the princess again. She leaned over the railing, staring at a distant star cluster that pulsed with soft light. "Do you know why I whisper your name?" she asked. Elias shook his head. I don't." Does it matter?" "It matters more than you know," she said. "The universe responds to names, to recognition. You are one of the few beings whose name is worth whispering." Elias swallowed hard. "But I'm just me. I don't have power. I don't have magic or control." "How can a name matter so much?" "Because it is not about control," she said. "It is about presence, about being seen, truly seen. When I whisper your name, the stars notice. They listen. They tremble not in fear, but in anticipation." He did not fully understand, yet the stars outside seemed to flicker again, almost as if agreeing. The faint pulses of distant suns, tiny yet unmistakable, matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Elias realized then that he was not just aboard a ship, not just walking among aliens. He was part of a larger story, a story written not in weapons or conquest, but in quiet choice and unseen influence. The fleet continued to follow them, and the aliens aboard the flagship began to report strange phenomena. Systems fluctuated, lights pulsed irregularly, and ancient artifacts aboard the ship seemed to react to Elias' presence. The assistant, who had once been skeptical, now approached him more often, asking subtle questions about thought, feeling, and choice. "You are a human," they said one day, "and yet you affect more than you realize. How do you remain so ordinary?" Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe being ordinary is what makes it possible," he said. "I don't try to control anything, I just act as I feel is right." The princess overheard him and nodded. "And that is why the stars tremble when I whisper your name." In the quiet hours, Elias explored more of the ship. He discovered rooms filled with artifacts from civilizations long gone, devices that seemed older than time, and star charts that spanned dimensions he could barely comprehend. He realized that the galaxy was far larger and more intricate than he had ever imagined. Yet even amidst all this complexity, he felt a simple truth. Humans were small, yes, fragile, yes, but they were unpredictable in ways that no alien technology could anticipate. As weeks turned into months, the relationship between Elias and the princess deepened. Not in romance, though there was a subtle bond forming, but in understanding. She began to trust his instincts, seek his perspective, and value his choices. The aliens aboard the ship began to respect him quietly, though they remained cautious. The first time the fleet made direct contact, Elias' instincts guided the conversation. He spoke not with threats or strategy, but with honesty and curiosity, asking questions about their culture, their fears, their hopes. The aliens were taken aback. no human had ever done so. Slowly they began to respond in kind, sharing small details of their lives and systems. The princess watched silently, noting every response, every flicker of light from the stars outside. "You do not even try," she said one evening, "and yet you change everything." Elias shook his head. "I don't know why, I just try to listen." "And listening," she said softly, "is more powerful than controlling, more enduring than conquest. You may be the first human the galaxy has truly heard, and that is remarkable." The stars responded again, faintly, almost like a sigh of approval. Elias could feel it in his chest, a quiet resonance that matched the pulse of distant suns. He realized that his presence alone had begun to influence not just the ship, or the fleet, or the aliens he encountered, but the very structure of the systems around them. By the time the fleet departed, the galaxy had shifted subtly. Elias' choices, his empathy, his quiet acts of presence had created ripples that no alien empire could ignore. The princess whispered his name once more, softly, privately, and this time the stars did more than tremble. They pulsed in patterns that could be read like messages, invisible to most but unmistakable to those who could see the influence of a human heart. Elias did not fully understand what was happening, nor did he try to. He had learned that understanding was not necessary to matter. Sometimes presence, attention, and care were enough, and in that quiet, small, human way he was beginning to change the galaxy. The princess stood beside him, silent and steady, and for the first time Elias realized that the stars were not distant, untouchable. They were listening. And the universe, vast and ancient, was beginning to pay attention to a human named Elias. Elias had begun to understand that being human in the vastness of the galaxy was more dangerous than anyone could imagine, not because of weapons or armies, but because of how unpredictable humans could be. Every choice he made, every small act of kindness or curiosity, sent ripples across star systems. He could see it in the flicker of distant stars, the subtle shifts in alien machinery, and the quiet awe of the crew who had once doubted him. The princess observed him often, though she never made her observations obvious. She would stand silently in the observation deck, her hands clasped lightly, eyes reflecting nebulae and starlight, watching Elias interact with alien technologies, crews, and even the distant fleets that had begun to take notice of his presence. She had whispered his name countless times now, each time sending waves through the cosmos, and each time the stars responded, subtly bending, shifting, almost as if aware of the human whose choices carried weight beyond comprehension. It was during a routine survey of a nearby star cluster that the first real test of his influence arrived. The cluster was known to be dangerous: unstable stars, erratic radiation flows, and a history of ship disappearances. Alien crews would have avoided it entirely, treating it as taboo, but Elias, guided by curiosity and a desire to learn, suggested they navigate closer. "I want to see it," he said simply, "not because it's safe, but because understanding comes from observation, not fear." The princess nodded. "You are learning the ways humans see the universe. Others measure danger and power. You measure possibility and potential." The ship's sensors began to pick up anomalies immediately. Stars flared unexpectedly, cosmic winds shifted, and instruments that had always been reliable recorded strange, ephemeral patterns. The crew murmured, unsettled, unsure how a human could provoke these changes merely by desiring knowledge. Elias walked to the observation dome and gazed at the cluster. It was beautiful, terrifying, alive in ways that made his chest ache with wonder. He felt the faint pulse of the stars, resonating with his own heartbeat. It was not loud, not violent, but undeniable. Somewhere deep in the cosmos, the universe was aware of him. As they approached, the princess came to stand beside him. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "The stars are responding to more than your presence. They are responding to your intent." I don't understand, Elias admitted. How can just looking and caring change the stars? They have always listened, she said. Most beings are too afraid to speak in ways the universe can hear. You act without fear, and the stars recognize that. It was then that the first emissaries arrived. Ships unlike any Elias had seen before moved gracefully through the cluster. They were ancient, built with elegance that suggested art as much as engineering. Unlike the fleets he had seen earlier, these beings did not immediately recognize threats or alliances. They paused, watching the human aboard the alien flagship with something like curiosity. The princess whispered his name again, softly, privately, and the stars pulsed in response. The emissaries' ships shimmered with unexpected colors, as though they too could sense the human's influence. Elias felt the weight of it all, the understanding that humans were not meant to dominate, but to awaken awareness in a galaxy that had long forgotten wonder. Over the next days, the emissaries approached slowly, sending communications not in commands or demands but in questions. They asked about Earth, about humans, about Elias himself. They asked why a single human could make such a difference in systems built over millions of years. Elias answered simply. He spoke not with ambition, nor with strategy, nor with desire for power. He spoke of curiosity, empathy, and hope. He told them about human laughter, about human perseverance, about the ways humans care for one another and for the world around them, even when it seems small and insignificant. The emissaries were silent for long periods after he spoke. Their systems, long calibrated for logic, strategy, and control, seemed to falter when faced with concepts they could not measure. Elias realized that humans were rare not because of strength, but because of unpredictability and meaning. Humans influenced the universe not by force, but by the way they engaged with it. The princess observed all of this with quiet pride. She had long known that humans were special, but seeing it in action, seeing a human navigate diplomacy, danger, and the unknown without trying to dominate, was astonishing. She had always lived in a galaxy where order was prized above understanding, control above empathy. Yet here was a human who could bend cosmic flows without even realizing it. One night, as the flagship drifted among the stars, Elias was alone on the observation deck. The cluster stretched before him, alive with lights and patterns he could barely comprehend. The stars pulsed faintly, as if listening, waiting. And in that quiet, he felt something ancient stir, a consciousness older than any civilization he had ever known, responding to the human who had done nothing extraordinary except act with care and attention. The princess joined him, stepping quietly into the chamber. "Do you feel it?" she asked, though she knew he did. "Yes," Elias whispered. "It's like the universe is awake," she nodded. "It is. It has always been awake. Most beings are too afraid to notice. You are learning to speak its language." Days turned into weeks as they traveled through the cluster. Elias grew accustomed to the subtle responses of stars and ships, to the quiet hum of systems that seemed to recognize him. The emissaries observed him constantly, fascinated and confused. And slowly, the crew of the flagship began to change as well. Those who had once doubted him began to notice the quiet power of human choice, the way a single act of consideration could ripple outward and alter outcomes. Then came the day when the cluster itself seemed to respond. A star that had been unstable for centuries stabilized temporarily, emitting a calm light that bathed the flagship. Instruments recorded shifts in cosmic winds that aligned perfectly with Elias' movements on the observation deck. The emissaries' ships shimmered in delight, if such a thing could be called delight. And Elias understood fully that he was no longer merely a human among aliens. He was a conduit, a bridge, a living signal to the universe that humans mattered. The princess whispered his name again, more insistently this time. The stars pulsed brighter, and Elias felt a strange warmth, as if the galaxy itself had embraced him. He did not understand how or why it worked, only that it did, and that his choices carried consequences far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Word of his presence spread across distant systems. Alien civilizations whispered about the human who could influence stars without weapons, who could shift ancient orders with empathy, who could awaken awareness in minds long bound by fear and control. Some were curious, some were wary, but all were compelled to pay attention. Elias was unaware of how much influence he wielded. He continued to act as he always had, with honesty and care. He spoke to the emissaries about human music, human stories, and the strange resilience of people who lived brief lives, yet carried meaning in every moment. Slowly, the emissaries began to see patterns they could not explain, to notice the ways in which humans shaped reality not by might, but by attention and understanding. The princess watched silently, knowing that the time was approaching when the galaxy would no longer be able to ignore humanity. She had always feared what might happen when humans were recognized for what they truly were. And yet, standing beside Elias, she felt a quiet hope that perhaps the universe could be changed not by violence or conquest, but by presence, by care, by the choices of a single human being. One evening, as the flagship drifted near the edge of the cluster, Elias spoke quietly to the princess. Do you think humans can really matter this much?" She smiled faintly, gazing at the distant stars. "Humans always matter," she said. "It is only that the galaxy is only now learning to listen. You are teaching it how." The stars pulsed softly, as if agreeing, and for the first time Elias understood the magnitude of his role. He was not a warrior, nor a ruler, nor a scholar. He was a human. And that was enough to make the stars tremble. The emissaries, now more curious than ever, began to mirror his actions. They observed, listened, and slowly, cautiously, adopted some of the human ways of seeing the universe. The galaxy began to change, subtly at first but unmistakably. Orders were questioned, ancient rules were reconsidered, and for the first time many beings realized that influence could come not from control, but from understanding and empathy. Through it all, the princess remained at Elias' side, whispering his name when he could not hear, guiding him not with commands but with trust. And the stars continued to respond, pulsing in patterns that only she could interpret, showing that the universe was aware of the human heart in ways it had never been before. Elias did not seek recognition. He did not seek power. He simply continued to act as humans always did, choosing care over indifference, curiosity over fear, connection over control. And in doing so, he had become something more than human. He had become a signal to the galaxy that life, in its simplest, most authentic form, could shape the cosmos in ways even the oldest civilizations could not predict. The stars trembled again, brighter and more insistently than ever, and the princess whispered his name for the final time in that cluster. This time, the tremor was not subtle. The stars pulsed as if responding to a summons, and Elias realized that humanity was no longer hidden or insignificant. It was a quiet revolution, without war or violence, but the consequences would echo through the galaxy for centuries. Humans were rare, unpredictable, and meaningful, and Elias, simply by being himself, had reminded the universe of a truth long forgotten. The smallest beings, guided by choice and care, could change the course of everything. For the first time, Elias smiled not with uncertainty but with understanding. He was a human. He mattered. And the stars, the galaxy, and perhaps even time itself were beginning to take notice. The galaxy had begun to change, though most beings did not fully understand why. It was subtle at first, a shift in how decisions were made, a pause before acts of domination, a faint acknowledgement that life could be more than conquest and control. And at the center of it all was Elias, the human who had done nothing extraordinary by alien standards, yet everything extraordinary by the universe's own measure. Elias had learned to move through the galaxy with quiet confidence. The princess remained by his side, a constant presence that was both comforting and inspiring. She no longer whispered his name only in secret. She now spoke it in moments of guidance, in moments of awe, and sometimes simply in recognition of his choices. And every time she did, the stars pulsed and flickered, responding in ways humans could not yet fully perceive. The alien empires, once certain of their dominance, began to realize that humans could not be ignored. Not because they wielded weapons or ruled planets, but because they acted in ways that the galaxy itself recognized. Elia's compassion, curiosity, and simple acts of understanding had shown that influence did not always come from control, and power did not always come from strength. One day, the flagship arrived at a crossroads of star systems, a hub of interstellar travel and governance. Alien leaders from countless civilizations had gathered to discuss trade, navigation, and diplomacy. The princess, in her role as heir to her people, had insisted that Elias be present. It was unprecedented. No human had ever been allowed to attend such a council, let alone speak. Elias felt a quiet nervousness. He had never sought recognition, and the thought of standing before representatives of dozens of civilizations was daunting. Yet when he looked at the princess, her calm confidence steadied him. "You do not need to perform," she said softly. "You only need to be yourself. That is enough." And so he entered the council chamber, a place of polished light, humming energy, and centuries of tradition. The alien leaders regarded him with curiosity, suspicion, and a hint of fear. They had heard rumors of the human whose presence could alter stars, of the small being who could disrupt systems and provoke ancient knowledge simply by acting with care. Elias took a deep breath. He did not speak of power, conquest, or strategy. He spoke of humanity, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as witnesses, as learners, as beings who sought understanding and connection. He spoke of the small acts that made life meaningful, the choices that rippled outward, and the importance of listening to one another across differences. The chamber was silent. Aliens who had always measured influence in terms of military strength and technological supremacy now found themselves confronted with a new metric: empathy, presence, and intention. And though Elias did not intend to teach, he could see in their faces that they were learning. The princess watched silently, her eyes reflecting distant stars and nebulae. She had never felt so certain of the human heart, of the quiet power that Elias wielded simply by being himself. She knew that the universe was listening, and that the galaxy was beginning to understand a truth that had long been forgotten, that even the smallest beings could shape the cosmos when guided by purpose and care. After he finished speaking, the stars outside the chamber responded, not with violence or fear, but with light. Constellations shimmered in patterns that mirrored the pulse of his heart. Instruments across the galaxy recorded subtle anomalies, shifts in energy that could not be explained by physics alone. And in those patterns, the leaders saw something profound. Humans had a gift, a presence that could alter outcomes without force, and it demanded recognition. In the days that followed, a remarkable transformation began. Alien civilizations that had long competed for dominance started to reconsider their actions. Where there had been rigid hierarchies and control, there were now dialogues, negotiations, and exchanges of understanding. Humans, with Elias at the forefront, became mediators, storytellers, and guides, teaching through example rather than decree. The princess and Elias spent long hours in the observation dome, watching the galaxy respond. Elias marveled at the subtle ways life shifted. He noticed distant fleets pausing to reconsider engagements, stars stabilizing unexpectedly, and energy flows aligning in ways that facilitated travel and communication. He did not fully understand how his presence caused these changes, yet he could feel the resonance of the universe with him, as if it were acknowledging the human heart at the center of it all. One evening, as they drifted near a newly charted nebula, the princess spoke softly. "You have done more than any alien empire could have imagined. You have shown that influence does not require domination and that presence matters more than power." Elias shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I just acted as I would on Earth. I listened. I cared. I spoke honestly. And that is why it works," she said. "Humans act without expectation of control. You do not calculate outcomes for victory, you act for understanding. And the universe, the stars, they respond to that truth." The stars outside shimmered as if in agreement, pulses of light weaving patterns across the nebula. Elias felt the warmth of their attention, a quiet affirmation that his existence had weight beyond his comprehension. Over the next weeks, the galaxy continued to shift. Humans were no longer considered insignificant. They were consulted, observed, and often sought for guidance. Alien empires, long dependent on rigid systems of command, began to adopt elements of human understanding: curiosity, patience, empathy, and collaboration. And through it all, Elias remained himself, humble, thoughtful, and attentive. The princess, witnessing this transformation, realized something profound. Humanity had never sought to conquer the stars. Yet by being themselves, humans had awakened the galaxy to possibilities that empires could not predict or control. It was not power that changed the universe, but meaning, choice, and presence. One quiet night, Elias stood alone on the observation deck. The stars stretched infinitely, shimmering with colors beyond imagination. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see the princess. "You have done more than any prophecy could have imagined," she said. "And yet, you remain ordinary in the best sense." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe ordinary is exactly what the galaxy needed." She reached out, brushing a hand lightly against his. "It is more than ordinary, it is human, and that is extraordinary." The stars above seemed to pulse brighter, almost like applause. It was a quiet celebration, but one that resonated across the cosmos. For the first time, Elias realized the true measure of influence. It was not wealth, not armies, not control. It was presence, understanding, and the courage to act in alignment with one's own heart. The flagship continued its journey through the stars. Wherever Elias went, small changes followed, systems stabilized, fleets reconsidered their actions, and civilizations paused to listen. The galaxy was learning, slowly but surely, that humans mattered in ways no one had anticipated. And the princess remained by his side, whispering his name at times, letting the stars know that the human they both believed in was guiding the cosmos, not through force or command, but through the simple, powerful truth of being. The final test of his influence came when an ancient council of alien leaders convened near the center of a star cluster. These leaders had ruled their civilizations for millennia, relying on power, fear, and rigid hierarchies. Elias entered the chamber quietly, accompanied by the princess. The council observed him with caution, expecting arrogance or strategy, but found only a human presence, calm, attentive, and honest. Elias spoke to the council not of conquest, nor control, nor rules. He spoke of understanding, of the value of listening, and of the ripple effects of compassion and careful choice. He told stories of humans on Earth, of their small acts that carried meaning far beyond themselves. He did not seek to dominate or persuade, he simply shared truth. For hours the council listened, and for hours the stars pulsed in silent approval. And when Elias finished, the chamber was quiet, not out of fear but out of recognition. These leaders, the oldest and most powerful in the galaxy, understood that humans had shifted the very fabric of interstellar relations without violence or force. The princess smiled quietly. "You have shown them what they could not see, and now the galaxy will remember." Elias felt a calm warmth spread through him. He was still human, still ordinary, yet he had changed the cosmos in ways he could not have imagined. The stars continued to shimmer, responding to him, acknowledging that humanity was no longer hidden or insignificant. As they left the council chamber, the princess whispered his name once more. This time, the stars did not merely tremble. They resonated, pulsing with light that stretched across systems, a quiet affirmation that a single human had reminded the galaxy of a truth long forgotten. Presence, care, and choice could shape the universe. Elias did not seek accolades or recognition. He only continued to be himself, acting with honesty, curiosity, and empathy. And in doing so, he became a living signal of humanity's potential, teaching the galaxy that influence was not measured by power, but by heart. The flagship drifted through the stars, and the princess stood beside him, her eyes reflecting distant constellations. "You have done more than any empire could have imagined," she said, "and the stars, they listen." Elias smiled. "Maybe that's enough." The stars pulsed softly, as if answering, and somewhere across the infinite expanse of space, the galaxy understood that humans mattered. Not because they sought to conquer, but because they were capable of connection, of care, of choices that resonated beyond the limits of understanding. The universe had always been listening. Elias had only needed to show it how. And as the flagship sailed on, carrying humans and aliens alike through the endless night, the stars shimmered in quiet celebration. Humanity had awakened the cosmos, not with violence, not with power, but with the simplest and most extraordinary gift of all, the human heart. And in that light, the princess whispered his name once more, and the stars listened eternally. The alien princess whispered his name, and the stars trembled.